Environmental Advisory Committee meeting to order. Before we continue, Natalie, would you like to say a few words? Because I know that some of us know the news, but not everybody. So maybe you would like to share.
Yes, thank you. So before we get started, I just wanted to introduce you all to a new staff member with the town, Sebastian Quinterin. He's here with us tonight. There he is, waving. He is the new energy and climate change analyst here with the town, and he'll be taking over my position while I go on leave at the end of May. He'll also be the staff liaison for this committee as well, so you can always reach out to him. He's in all of our meeting invites now, so you could reach out. Sebastian holds a master's in climate change from the University of Waterloo. He has several years experience as an environmental scientist and project coordinator. And working with him these last few weeks, he's really shown a lot of knowledge and passion for this area. So I know he's going to do a great job while I'm gone and really support this committee. So that's all I wanted to say. Thanks.
Thanks, Natalie, and welcome, Sebastian. We're really
Thank you.
happy to have you. And you know, it sounds like you've got a lot under your belt as far as climate change, and you're in the right committee here, and we'll definitely keep you to the task, that's for sure.
Awesome.
So welcome. Thank you so much, Natalie. Appreciate that. Okay, so moving along, I would like to start by acknowledging that the land on which we live and work is a traditional territory of the Anishinaabe and the Haudenosaunee and the Wendat peoples whose presence here continues to this day, or as part of the treaty lands of the Mississauga, the Credits, and the William Treaties First Nations. We acknowledge and thank them for sharing this land with us and shared understanding of how the rich cultural heritage that has existed for centuries and how our collective past brought us to where we are today will help us walk together into a better future. Okay, so approval of the agenda. May I please have a motion to approve the agenda circulated by Legislative Services? Councillor Gartner, second by Ashley. Any questions or comments on the agenda? Seeing none, I'll call the vote. All those in favor? Opposed? That carries. Any declarations of pecuniary interest? Seeing none. May I have a motion to receive the minutes of February 23rd, 2022? Councillor Gartner and Ashley. Any questions or comments on the minutes? Any concerns? No? Okay, perfect. I'll call the vote. All those in favor? Opposed? That carries. Perfect. So we have no delegations this evening. Matters for consideration 7.1 memorandum for climate energy and climate analysis, change analysis, climate change adaptation plan. So first, I want to introduce a presentation by Lisa McTavish, the advisor for the climate change risk and resilience, and Christina Schwantes, specialist, climate change resilience and sustainability of WSP. I want to welcome you guys, and please remind you have 10 minutes for your presentation.
Hi there. I was watching the YouTube stream. I've just entered this meeting, and so I think there might have been a little bit of a delay.
Okay, so that's fine. I'm just introducing you guys for your presentation for the climate change adaptation plan. I've introduced you to everybody. So I guess I have Christina and Lisa. So yeah, so Lisa McTavish and Christina Schwantes. Or hopefully I said that properly. If I didn't. You did. Okay, perfect. So by all means, go ahead with your presentation. Just reminding you have 10 minutes.
Thank you so much. Okay, here we go. So thank you for the introduction. I'm Lisa McTavish. Chris, I'm going to be presenting a little bit quickly, trying to distill over a year of work into 10 minutes. So here we go. And then Christina will join me for questions afterwards. So I'm going to give you a rundown of our climate change adaptation plan and really just summarize the work that we did and focus on our conclusions because we're near the end of the project. So just quickly, I'll take you through the process that we went through and then really focus on our top risks and recommendations that came out of it, because that is what is most important. So the goals of this project, the adaptation plan, were to assess the climate risks to the town's built and natural assets. You can see there's 4 different categories there.
Did you, sorry to interrupt, did you want to do a screen share at all so you can go
Oh
through
my
the
goodness.
presentation?
Yes, of course. Let me share my screen.
And if you need more than 10 minutes, we can always ask for a waive of procedure to give you a little extra time. Do you think 10 minutes is going to be enough, or did you need a couple more minutes?
I think it will be enough considering I've spent a couple. I'll just jump into where I was at the agenda here. I think it'll be fine.
Okay, if it gets to that point, then we can waive procedure at that point and have that conversation.
Awesome, thank you. Okay, so here now you can see, I hope, my agenda of what we're going to talk about today. As far as the goals of the project, which now hopefully you can see are listed on the screen, really was to assess the risk to the town's infrastructure. And we did that by looking at 4 different asset categories that you can see on the screen there. From there, the goal was to identify some adaptation measures and build an adaptation plan around that. So just a little bit of context, when we're talking about climate change here, there are really 2 sides to the problem. There's first the impact that we are having on the environment, and there's also the impact that the environment is having on us. And so today we're focusing on adaptation to climate change. So we know the town is already thinking about climate change in different ways. So, how can we mitigate the impacts that the town's operations are having on the environment? But also, how do we need to adapt to the changes that climate change is bringing? And so why are we concerned about that, and why do we need to act now? Well, recently, we've been seeing temperatures are not only increasing on average, but we're also seeing the extremes becoming more severe and more frequent. And that's what this graph is showing on the right side. And that's also leading to all kinds of other extreme weather events. We're also having an increasing number of policies and regulations that are coming out that are requiring municipalities and other levels of government to address climate change and climate risk. And that is the case in Ontario. Now, in the town of Aurora, we have seen some impacts of climate change and extreme weather already. We've seen heavy rainfall and flooding, we've seen heat waves, we've seen windstorms, and also just increasing average temperatures. As part of this project, we did a detailed assessment of what the town of Aurora can expect to see when it comes to climate change based on climate projections. And so within the next 30 years, we can expect to see higher temperatures and extreme heat, more rain on average, but also more intense rainfall, which can lead to flooding. On the other side, we can also expect to see more frequent instances of drought and heat waves, and also changes to our winter conditions. So, increased average temperature all year round, which, will impact our freeze-thaw cycles. And we're also expecting to see an increase in the severity and frequency of storms. So with all of that climate change projection information, we did a risk assessment to determine how these factors might impact the town and its operations and asset management. To do that, we applied the PIVC protocol, which is designed specifically for public infrastructure. There's a lot on this slide here. I won't be going through the steps now, but I will take you through kind of a high level of how we did the risk assessment. So risk is a product of likelihood and consequence, as you can see there. Fairly simple formula. There's a lot more that goes into it, but just to break it down simply, for this project, we asked first, what is the likelihood that future climate conditions might impact the town's infrastructure? And we rated that from 0 to 7. We used climate change projection data that I mentioned before to do that calculation. Next, we asked, if an impact does occur, how severe would the consequences be? We also rated that from 0 to 7. Putting those things together, we get a risk score, which ranges from low to high. And so we did that risk assessment for the town of Aurora, and here is a summary of our results. I won't ask you to look at the numbers too closely here, because the most important thing that I want to highlight for you is that we didn't identify any high risks in our assessment. There were some medium risks, and for those, we have recommended some adaptation actions. But really, an important takeaway is that there were no, extreme vulnerabilities or red flags that need immediate attention, which is great. And so now I will go through a scan of some of our recommendations by asset type. There's a lot more than what I'm going to present to you now, but I'm trying to draw out some of the more important recommendations and findings here. So first, for our linear engineered assets, so the stormwater system, roads, culverts type of thing, the actions were really focused on, improving the resilience of these systems, particularly the stormwater system, to extreme precipitation is an important one, so flooding, but also drought events where we rely on some water to manage our stormwater. Also looking at improving road maintenance and operations. We may see some degradation due to temperature, due to storms, and so just adapting operations to respond to that. Next, looking at our water infrastructure, the biggest thing here for our drinking water and for our sanitary infrastructure is flooding. Flooding was a big one for these ones. So really just looking at these assets and determining where they might be most vulnerable to flooding, and making sure that, operations are prepared to respond to those events, which may happen more frequently or with a greater severity. With our parks, there were a number of things that came up, but what I'm highlighting to you now is basically that our actions were focused on operations and maintenance, really looking at the increased temperature events, so dry weather, but also flooding. It's kind of opposite events, which can impact our parks and our sports fields in similar but different ways. And also looking at water storage and landscaping. So infiltration can kind of solve both of those issues. And our last category was facilities. And here, the most important action is related to our increase in average temperature, our increase in those extreme heat events, and making sure that our cooling systems are prepared to adapt to that, especially where those systems may be needed for, where some facilities may be needed as cooling centers. Some populations may rely on town facilities to go for somewhere to keep cool. So making sure that the ability to provide those cool temperatures in those extreme heats is there can be important. And also, looking at storms, wind storm events and flooding impacts to facilities as well. So that was a very quick rundown of our major takeaways in terms of risks and recommendations. But I think what's most important to take away is that from this detailed risk assessment, which, we had a team of engineers, we had consultation with the town at multiple different occasions, we had some town staff interviews, and we dug into the data. From that assessment, we did not identify any high risks to the town's infrastructure. That doesn't mean that climate change may not change that, but it does mean that we didn't find any significant vulnerabilities or red flags. We know that there are already studies happening to look at flooding and other risks, and so continuing to do those studies and manage assets through asset management planning will continue to be very important. And really just to highlight that, the adaptation plan has some recommendations that will be important to manage climate change, to manage our asset management, and to really reduce costs in the future due to rehabilitating after issues occur. Spending the money now to adapt as much as we can in advance will pay off in the long run. And that is the end of my presentation. So thank you very much. And I will pass it back over to Rachel or Natalie to facilitate questions.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Any comments or questions from, oh, I guess I got to put a mover and seconder on the floor before questions. So can I have a mover and a seconder to put the item on the floor for discussion? Sandy and Sam. Thank you very much. Any questions or comments on this presentation at all? Councillor Gartner?
Thank you. It's scary to me, but it's good that we've had your work. I can imagine how much work went into this, more than we could know from the short presentation. Can you go back to the slide before recommendations?
Yes. Which had the summary of risks, yes?
Yes, thank you.
Is this
Thank
large
you.
enough? Okay.
Thank you.
Great.
So no high risks, medium risks. I noticed you didn't mention the sanitary network underwater.
Yeah, so
Oh,
the
yeah, you
sanitary,
did right there. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. So I'm sorry you didn't mention it when you were speaking, but it's right there. So for example, it's a 13, it's a medium. That would be one that the residents would be very unhappy about. So what does that actually mean?
yeah, so what we found were, we looked at all of the different assets in the town through our asset inventory. And we had a huge matrix, which looked at every asset and every relevant climate hazard. And we looked at each of those interactions to determine whether those things will intersect. And if they do, will it result in a high risk or low risk, et cetera. And so for the sanitary system, we found that there were 13 of those interactions between various assets within the sanitary system and climate hazards that ended up in medium rated risks. And so the quantity might be associated with just the number of assets that are within that sector. And so that's why we kind of, this is the results of our risk assessment, which is not kind of the be all end all. What's important is what comes out of it. So for the sanitary system, we found that flooding is our biggest driver of risk for this particular asset category, because we know that flooding can infiltrate the stormwater system. And if we have backups in our sanitary system, if we have backups there, like you said, residents are not going to be happy. It can lead to environmental impacts. It can lead to human impacts, health impacts, and just undesirable cleanup for the town. So that's why we're finding the sanitary network has some medium rated risks, because if it does get overwhelmed, it could lead to some considerable consequences.
Well, and also there's 12 that are low risk. So there's a lot there.
Yeah.
And you know what, I really misspoke, because I think that the residents would be very unhappy about all of the water issues. I did read the report, but it was a few days ago. There's no dollar figure, is there, to anything that you've done here?
Yeah, so we've provided our best estimates for costs
So-
associated with the recommendations. And they're within buckets of, I believe it was 0 to 10,000, 10,000 to 100,000, 100 to 1,000,000. And there may have been one more. And so, yeah, it's really to give an idea for planning purposes. It's not like we've done a detailed engineering study on each specific risk to determine what needs to be done in terms of like materials and quantities and whatnot. Because that
Thank
would
you.
provide, yeah.
And actually, now that you're talking about it, I remember it. But was there a total? Or were we
No.
just, no? Okay. Guess that's all for now, except, this is, again, it's scary because it's going to cost a lot of money and it has potentially really negative effects on our residents. So it's great to have this information. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Thank you,
You're
Councillor
welcome. I'll
Gardner.
just add one more comment, which
Yeah.
is that a lot of our recommendations kind of go along with asset management planning that's already happening.
Right.
And so I think, for the different kind of disciplines that we've talked about, or the different like responsibilities that we've assigned with these recommendations, it'll take some staff to look at this and say, we already do this, but we need to change this a little bit, so maybe we can reduce costs that way.
Thank you. And I don't think we really won't know what we're talking about probably till 2023. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Gartner. Before I go to more questions, I do have a note here that perhaps Natalie, you might want to add anything to the report. My only question is, before you have any comments, Natalie, is about the risk assessment that Councillor Gartner was talking about. Will council be receiving kind of a breakdown of what low, medium, high risk means? Because I do think it kind of helps us make a decision of, our proactive opportunity and what that risk assessment is, since it's not really clear. So, I see. But I kind of think that we're identifying that there's 12 or 13, like what are those 13? I think we should have kind of a bit more of an in-depth kind of breakdown so we know where our attention should be, especially at budget time when we're talking about stormwater management. I personally would like to see that. But Natalie, do you have anything you'd like to add to the report before I go to any further questions? And then Barry, I see you have your hand up, but
Sure. I don't actually have more to add to the presentation because I think they did a great job presenting the information. I just wanted to add that this is the town's first ever climate change risk and vulnerability study. So this is providing the town with information that staff in the town had never saw before, right? So this is really providing a lot of information and is a great first step into climate resiliency and implementing this into our asset management planning, as Lisa pointed out. So so that's all I wanted to say. I don't know, just a comment, Councillor Gilliland, with your comment. Definitely we can, the council presentation will be different than this one, in that when we were preparing for this presentation and this meeting, we pretty much had just drafted the implementation plan, which is all of those recommendations and estimated costs, timelines, and things like that. So it wasn't quite ready for this presentation or for this meeting, but for the council meeting, it will have a much deeper focus. In that presentation, we'll be going over that probably in more detail, and it'll be clearer to those watching. And also the actual report will be provided as well as an attachment, right? So council and whoever is interested can go through it, and we'll have all of the information covered in the report. So it will look a bit different, but I think your feedback is really helpful. So we'll make sure that we do that for the council presentation.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Keel. I appreciate it. Barry, you had a question?
Yes, we're looking at a risk assessment, and we're also alluding to a cost assessment as a follow-up step. We're on the headwaters of the Holland River system. Newmarket, if they go through a similar process, they're going to be looking at the flow in that river system from us. Where in the process will we probably be faced with cost potential from Newmarket and downstream? I mean, if we don't slow down the flood process of the water that's generated within our town, then it's going to impact downstream. It's not a risk to Aurora, but does it not kind of get into Newmarket's risk assessment if they go through a similar process? Could we not see additional expectations and associated costs from flood control, the impact downstream? So I'm wondering, where in the process would council be confronted with potential cost estimates from the downstream part of the river system? Thank you.
Thanks, Barry. It's a very good question. I don't know if Ms. Keel, you want to take a stab at it, but it's a different perspective.
Yeah, I think that's a perspective that, to be honest, I haven't come up with or thought of. So I don't know if Lisa or Christina have any thoughts on that, but I mean, I'm taking note of it. I think that's something to consider. I don't think it was considered in this project because we were, assessing what is within the boundary of Aurora. But I think sharing our findings and our recommendations with Newmarket would probably be, as a minimum, something that we can do. I don't know, Lisa, Christina, if you have any comments on that. But
Lisa,
thanks, Barry.
Lisa, did you want to take this on?
Yeah, and I'll see if actually Christina wants to support as well, but I'll take a stab first. I think Natalie, great point about Newmarket. I think the risks to that municipality would be quite similar to this one, at least with respect to the climate change projections. Those would be almost exactly the same. And then with respect to flood management, at the watershed level, it does become a conservation authority kind of study. And so, as Natalie mentioned, this study hasn't looked at those kind of downstream impacts to the town of Newmarket. But I think it's, I think collaboration on such a thing is going to be more important in the future. So I think it's a great point.
Thank you, Lisa. Barry, do you have any other things to add? No? Anybody else? I have a question. Maybe I'll get other people's creativity sparked. Within this project, you touched on parks and natural heritage, and as far as like what to focus on, and I'm just curious as to why there was really no point given to protecting natural capital assets. As we're talking about flooding, one of the number one things with our natural capital assets is to absorb a lot of that water and maintaining our wetlands and, that stewardship of those areas. So I was really hoping to see within this report that recommendation would be there, because this is going to be a guiding document for council to adopt and, try to mitigate some of the climate adaptation and mitigation. I would like to see, or capture some of their natural capital assets and plan ahead and maintain that. Is there a reason why that wasn't highlighted, or is this just really high level? I don't know who wants to take that on, if it's Lisa or Ms. Keel. I would say Lisa, because I think you guys put the report together.
Yeah, and I'll actually pass this one to Christina, if that's okay.
Sure, Christina.
Sure, thank you. So in terms of what we did include in the assessment, a lot of the biggest risks we found to natural heritage and natural assets in the community were risks from extreme weather to tree canopy. So that's one of the recommendations that is really important, that is included. And Councillor, I do think you bring up a really great point, that it is important in addition for us to think about how we can consider other ways that the town can protect natural assets through its asset management planning. It's a great avenue to start to do that. And lots of Ontario municipalities will be integrating natural assets into their asset management planning processes. So that's another opportunity that's kind of happening through the OREG 588 right now, is to do that. And so I think we do have an opportunity with this project. Lisa, we can certainly think through in that final report how we can highlight those opportunities for protecting natural assets, because you're right, there are a lot of climate resilience and decarbonization co-benefits among many other ecosystem services for protecting those systems. And we can build upon what we do have now with protecting those natural heritage assets from extreme weather, to look at, other things as well.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. I'd really like to have something there to kind of give me to dig my teeth into. So when I do go to council and I want to ask for this, I can refer to this guiding document to say this is something that's been identified as important to our town to protect. And so that would certainly help. Last question I would have is, as far as the recommendations, public education. So I say that because if flooding is one of the greatest risks, I think the homeowners and residents need to do their due diligence. And as a town, we can provide a lot of public education on what they can do at home in this regard to protect their home from flooding, installing rain gardens, permeable areas and of such. I didn't see any of that kind of a recommendation in this report. Is that something that you or is there a reason why? Are you intending on it? Maybe this is really high level, but I just would like to see that. I don't know if someone wants to take that on.
I can respond to this one. So I think the reason why we're not seeing those kind of homeowner recommendations is the focus of this study was really to inform asset management planning. And, that is, as you mentioned, that is, it's important that for flood management in particular, that everyone, does do their part and do their due diligence with respect to, planning infrastructure and, planning our budgets to do what we can to mitigate flooding. I think that will really focus on the town's assets and the town's infrastructure. But, of course, getting the public involved and getting that knowledge out to the public is also very important.
Thank you very much. Okay, I'm going to move over to Councillor Gardner. She had her hand up first, and then Barry. And I'm just going to close my curtain and step away for a moment because I have the sun in my face because it's moved.
Barry, please go ahead with me.
Okay, Barry, you can go first.
The issue of flood control and the preservation of our park assets, they can be at loggerheads, one against the other. It comes to mind that I believe there's a large stormwater retention pond being mentioned in studies and reports located, I think it's Machel Park. In other words, there's a concern that slowing down the discharge of floodwater, stormwater, is a priority, was recognized as a priority with that one instance of Machel Park. They would lose the playground recreational area. I believe it's immediately north of Orchard Heights Drive. Does this study, do these recommendations include acceleration of this program of increase to the stormwater retention pond system? I'm wondering if it's just go ahead as the schedule that we originally had indicated, or should the schedule be accelerated due to the increase in unusual weather events? Thank you.
Lisa?
Thank you for the question. I think what is important that's coming out of this study is that, we have done a scan of the infrastructure in the town and of course the natural assets as well as much as possible. And we've highlighted what we expect to be, based on climate change, the highest risks. And so I think the results of this study and where the highest risks are will help to prioritize those types of actions that you mentioned. And so with respect to parks and flooding of infrastructure, we have in the report, we have a specific line item which deals with that particular issue. And if we find that, that is a low risk as compared to like every single risk on the sanitary system, then it may not push that, to the forefront as much as, we may think based on that situation that you mentioned at that park. So I think that's kind of the focus of this study and where it can be the most helpful. And in some cases, like our highest risks did relate to flooding and the stormwater and the sanitary network. So I think hopefully a takeaway from that is to, put a bit of a focus on there. But we've also provided in each of our recommendations on when to implement them, like short-term priorities, medium and long-term. And so, ideally short-term priorities are addressed first. And the reason that we selected those or that we recommended those priorities is based on the risk level that they're addressing. And also just, the nature of the recommendation and kind of the urgency of the recommendation. So I think, it's difficult to get into in this short format, but I think the report should provide a bit more of that, I guess, just reasoning and justification behind those types of actions.
Thank you.
So, any other questions, Barry? No? Okay, Councillor Gartner.
Thank you. Going back to the green infrastructure, and Natalie, this is really to you. I know Councillor Gilliland and I have been talking about that. And what I find, if we're doing asset management, I don't find that there's we never have a budget item that puts money towards using green infrastructure, so important with respect to flooding, especially. So I don't know if the report to council will include it, but I would like somehow to give it more than a nod, so that when we're doing our management plans, there will be actual money. Rachel and I won't have to fight to have money put into green infrastructure, because at the end of the day, it's relatively cheap infrastructure. I don't know, do you have any comment on that, Natalie?
Natalie, do you have any you want to add to that?
Yes, I think this has been a topic that's coming up more and more with our asset management planning, and Councillor Gilliland has also brought this up too. And we're trying to work green infrastructure and natural heritage into the asset management planning as its own, category. Christina mentioned it, that in the OREG 588, which is our municipal asset management planning regulation, they have included it in recent years. So it is something new, relatively new, that I think municipalities are trying to get in there, though it's not quite straightforward, as Councillor Gilliland and I are realizing with discussions with our asset management planning team. So it is something that we will continue to try to integrate. I don't know if Christina or Lisa, you have any insights about other municipalities and how they have integrated this new, category into this OREG as described within the OREG in bringing it into asset management planning. I think that's definitely the long-term goal. And this project, I feel like, would really support that and is maybe the first step towards that, that we can really start pushing that going forward in our asset management planning. So I don't know if you have anything, Lisa or Christina, on that, and any experience from other jurisdictions.
Lisa, did you want to chime in? Or Christina? I see Christina's got her hand up. Go ahead.
Thanks, Councillor. I can just add, I'm not able to pull specific examples at the moment, but a lot of what municipalities are doing, I apologize, there's a fire alarm, one second. On a fire alarm and ambulance. What a lot of municipalities are starting out with is conducting studies into the value of the natural capital in their communities. So those types of studies would look at, first of all, like an inventory of what's there, and then looking at some of the different ecosystem services and processes that those natural systems provide. And a great way that study can link in with what we've done on this risk assessment is looking at, the potential of green space and permeable surfaces and tree canopy in potentially mitigating or avoiding costs that could be incurred from climate change impacts. So doing some inventory and exploration of some of the valuation process, as Natalie alluded to, is pretty complicated. There's not a universally accepted way to do it as of right now, but there are ways out there in these types of studies that you can start to estimate or quantify some of the benefits of these things, and then that can make it a lot easier to kind of plan and make investment decisions and bring in the benefits of natural systems as a solution and compare it to other traditional gray infrastructure or hard infrastructure solutions that you might decide to also implement for things like flooding.
Well,
Councillor?
and we were way ahead of the curve when we did, and I know Barry brought this to our attention when we did our the value of natural capital assets. I think that was 2013. I'm not sure, Barry. And then Sam pointed out that, there's been a lot of change. So at some point we really should be doing a new one because we had the idea, but it just got dropped basically. The other thing is my motion that passed, that staff, I guess, will come back when they can about also protecting what we have is really important. And I don't know whether that fits into any of the work that you've done. The last thing I'd like to ask, I'm pretty worried about us losing power. Through perhaps windstorms or intense rain. So that's not included in here. What would that be considered? That wouldn't be asset management? I'm not sure where it'd be included. but I'm
Lisa?
concerned.
Lisa?
Yeah, so it would actually be included in asset management, and that would fall, what came out of our assessment is that risk primarily falls under facilities. There are some other potential issues within the infrastructure systems where a loss of power could be a problem, such as like pumping stations within our water networks. And for some of those pumping stations, there is already backup power in place, which is great. Not all, not that there are very many, but I think a larger issue would be to the facilities. And so that is kind of, of course, it is a risk that we did highlight in this study as well. And so just managing, it's kind of emergency management planning, right? So in a heat wave is another example, but in a power outage, like what facilities do we need to keep running so that, our town, our community can remain safe and can remain taken care of, and oftentimes as a municipality who isn't, providing the power, to the community and to these facilities, there's not a ton that can be done with respect to managing that, except for preparing for those outages. And, it's not only just, install backup power everywhere, but it's really just making those decisions about what facilities are critical, or what, other infrastructure or other assets within like our water system, for example, are critical, and how can we kind of manage our budget so that we have the backup power where we need it in event of power outages.
Thank you. I think we have backup power for computer systems. But I've been trying to find out for a long time for warming centers, emergency for residents where they can come to in an emergency. I don't think that we have anything like that. Natalie, am I right or wrong? Hopefully I'm wrong, but
We don't have, yeah, and I believe that's actually in one of the recommendations.
Okay.
Lisa, for the cooling centers, having the backup systems at those cooling centers that are part of the town for these emergency situations. I think that was one of them, right? I'm trying to remember from the implementation plan.
It looks like cooling systems, it's just more or less like the HVAC system and the upgrade.
Uh-huh.
That's what.
Yeah,
it
and
was
have,
focused
yeah,
on. So maybe like emergency, I know that we are working on emergency preparedness. So perhaps maybe a mention to emergency preparedness with climate, risks affecting that change. And, maybe that's somewhere in a recommendation we need to kind of point to include those considerations in that case, in that severe event.
thank
Yeah,
you.
I think it's identified like within the facilities asset, but I think that's a good point that perhaps it needs to be, anything that's impacting emergency preparedness could be pulled out into a different kind of section, or, highlighted somewhere else. Something that I think would be great. Because we did it by asset type, there might be some emergency preparedness from different asset types, right? But I think pulling those ones and making perhaps one section just on that emergency preparedness would be a good suggestion.
Thank you. And if I may, they always talk about emergency preparedness with respect to the command center and, what we need to do to keep the town running. But it's never mentioned with respect to the residents. Thank you.
Right.
Thank you. I have one more thing I'd like to add, a question, if that's okay, if I may. On the water infrastructure recommendations, and maybe the report will be a little bit more focused. I was hoping it would have a little bit more specific teeth about saying like, understanding the capacity and vulnerabilities. And so if we are going to anticipate heavy participation or severe weather events, often at council around the table, I know Councilor Gardner and I will throw out, being prepared for that, 100-year storm, 200-year storm, whatever it is. So I would like to see a little bit more specific of what we're supposed to be preparing for, because again, we're talking about a budget, we're talking about money. And if we have something to say, well, the recommendation is, for these severe weather events in our water network, we should be really preparing for that 150-year storm or that 200-year storm. What is that threshold? And right now I don't really have a measurement of what that means to prepare. So I'm a little, I guess, I'm lacking kind of that information. Would the report include some of that, or is this something that just it's a little brand new? I don't know who wants to answer that. Lisa?
I'll go ahead. Yeah, so we are, as part of this study, we have kind of pulled all of that data, what we're expecting to see with respect to what climate change may bring for those storm events, which we're expecting to increase in severity. And so, the 100-year storm may change. And that's what, the projections are showing, that, it will change. And so currently our design practices are based on historical data. And now we're moving into kind of a new territory where people need to design for uncertainty, because all of our climate projections that we look at are just projections. They're not, this is what's going to happen. And so designing for uncertainty is a little complicated, but we have pulled that data and, explained kind of all of those assumptions and how we got there within the report. As far as specifically what design criteria should be included, to understand where changes need to happen in the system, it really needs like some models to be run, which can be pretty expensive. I know already there is some flood management studies that have been done, and the conservation authorities are looking at what flooding may occur with respect to climate change. That is different from the capacity of the stormwater system. And so that is something that is, designed, and that is something that is designed based on historical events. So yeah, basically it kind of requires some modeling to be done. And that modeling should, as we recommend, should look at future climate projected inflow and precipitation, rather than your previous like 100-year or regional storm events. Christina, did I miss anything there? Is there anything to add?
Christina?
Thanks. Lisa, I think you covered most of it. And what I'm hearing, maybe if you can confirm, is that the recommendation through our report is that there are potentially further studies done specific to how a particular system is designed, and then how that system would perform in storms of a given intensity. And those intensities should be based on future climate projections.
Thank you. And I guess I'll end it with a comment, and perhaps it's really just for staff. I'm just really trying to simplify. I think, like, I don't know what the current threshold is. The standard might be prepare for that 100-year storm. And I would hope that the province and the federal government and, the region eventually will increase that standard to say, we should be building and developing, moving forward, preparing for that 150-year storm, or whatever that threshold is. So I was kind of hoping to see through these kinds of, I guess, reports, that might be a recommendation through this to identify maybe recommending a higher threshold than what the standard is. So I'll just leave it at that comment. I understand that Colin might have his hand up, although I didn't see it. So Colin, do you have your hand up for a comment?
Oh, I just put it in the chat, actually. I was just wondering, I suppose it's for our technical people really to make recommendations to council, but what about communicating with other municipalities to see what they're doing? Because I don't know that Aurora would be much different than Orangeville, or, I'm just pulling that out, but we're all in the same sort of general area. And I imagine we have the same challenges to a large extent. So I imagine they're also getting studies done and getting recommendations done. So it would make sense to me. And they're probably talking to conservation authorities and Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry and these sort of people. But it makes sense to me to have meetings and try to pool our resources and, make common plans.
Thanks, Colin. Does anybody want to take a stab at that or comment? Ms. Keel?
Yeah, just like overall on this topic, Lisa and Christina both mentioned like working, the town works very closely with the Conservation Authority on these types of topics. It's not a topic that or a decision, designing decision that the town alone would take, but something that would be worked together with the conservation authorities and other municipalities within the watershed, and even further getting that pushed to other jurisdictions as well. So I hear what you're saying, and the report does discuss that in more detail. So there is more information on it. I don't think there'll be a recommendation to actually change it. These design standards, but they have to be considered like Lisa was describing, you know, moving away from historic, climate trends and historic weather events, and now shifting to the unknown and taking those consideration into the design. So that kind of high level recommendation is in there, but specifically changing the design standards at this point, at this level of this project, isn't going to be part of it. But that's something the town, we will push for and work with our other partners to do and find a methodology that, you know, makes sense and everyone agrees with, and that kind of thing. So a lot of partnership on that topic, I believe, going forward.
Thanks, Natalie. Lisa, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, I just want to add one quick thing to what Natalie mentioned, which was really well put, Natalie. Thanks for summarizing that. It's not only about standards, but it's also largely about levels of service. So the town does specify levels of service that, you know, the town wants to provide to the community. And if the town said, well, we want there to never, ever be any flooding in the town, well, then, you know, you would probably need to look at climate change and put a lot of money into the stormwater management system and so on. And so that's where, like, you know, design standards are kind of one thing, maybe let's say the baseline, and then levels of service can be tailored to each town based on the community's needs on top of that.
Thanks, Lisa. Colin, do you have any follow-up?
No, that's fine. Thank you.
Thanks, Colin. Anybody else have any questions? Comments on the report? No, I just have one final one, and I could be completely out of turn as far as the expectation here. Is there a reason why we didn't really, I know we're focusing on water and storm sewers and facilities, but is there a reason why we didn't focus on any investing in green infrastructure within town facilities, just in general, with, you know, whether it's, you know, I know we're doing EV, and I know that, you know, perhaps, you know, more permeable surfaces as we move away from, you know, a lot of asphalt and concrete. Is there a reason why we didn't look at, you know, carbon capture or energy differently within facilities within the report as a recommendation? I don't know who wants to take that on.
Maybe just to clarify, do you mean integrating like greenhouse gas emission reduction measures within the project?
Well, yeah, because we are talking about climate adaptation and mitigation. So you know, it's such a broad topic. So, you know, we could talk about, you know, carbon capture and, you know, trees and that kind of protection on town, like just like natural capital assets, but also on town properties as well. You know, that does affect climate change. And so I would think that that would fall under a mitigation or some sort of measure that we'd want to protect and be aware of. I know we have, you know, our green fleet now, and, you know, we've done our community energy plan, and, you know, we're doing green development standards. And I think we're a little ahead of the game than other municipalities, which is great. But at the same time, I would certainly expect within this presentation or report that even though we've done these things, it would be something that would be highlighted as something that towns should be doing. And if we need to be doing something better and above what we're doing now, then should it not be mentioned?
So, I mean, Lisa or Christina, if you want to jump in, the scope of this project was only on the adaptation side. So focusing on our town-owned assets and assessing if they're at risk or vulnerable to climate change. And it wasn't an assessment of what our town-owned assets are doing that are impacting, you know, climate change in the sense of, you know, releasing greenhouse gas emissions or emitting greenhouse gas emissions. Something that could be highlighted in this project is any of the recommendations that actually hit both, just as, like, you know, a double whammy, like, you know, if we implement this recommendation, you're actually hitting both areas, which could happen in some of these recommendations, which I think would, really help those projects get prioritized.
Yes.
For sure. I
Mhm.
know also we're starting our planning, getting the project ready for our next corporate energy plan, so it's a 5-year plan. We're going to be renewing it in 2024, or the deadline is 2024. So we are starting to break down that project and start including kind of new areas that weren't assessed in the past. So what you mentioned could be something that we add to the scope of that project, because it does deal with energy use and greenhouse gas emission from our town operations. So it would probably fit that project better than this particular one that had a kind of a more narrow scope on adaptation measures specifically.
Okay, perfect. All right.
But yeah,
Thank you. I appreciate that. Just wanted some
Something-
clarity.
it's good timing because that's what we're working on.
Perfect. I want to see it all in there supporting this and giving us some teeth so Councillor Gartner and I can utilize it around council to ensure we can make some positive change. Any other questions or comments on this report? Nope, seeing none. All right, so if there's no further comments on the report, I'll call the vote. All those in favor in receiving the report and the comments being perfect? Opposed? That carries. Perfect. Okay, so 7.2 memorandum from Economic Development Officer. Oh, and by the way, before I move on, I want to thank Christina and Lisa so much for your presentation. And Ms. Keel for all your hard work. This will probably be your last environmental committee meeting with us. So thank you very much for all your time that you spend here. I'll see you next year, but thank you again. So thanks, guys.
You all.
Thank you for having us.
Hi.
Thanks. Okay, so again, sorry guys, on 7.2 memorandum for economic development officer community improvement plan review consultation. May I have a mover and a seconder to put the, oh, wait a second. Do we have a presentation on this? Ms. House, would you, who's speaking to this?
Nick is speaking to it.
Nick?
He's on.
Okay, Ms. Botis, do I have to have a motion to put the item on the floor for discussion prior to the presentation? Linda?
I'm sorry, is there a presentation or no? It's just staff speaking to it.
Nick? Is there?
Yeah, we have a presentation. It's attachment 2.
Okay, so if you wouldn't mind, go ahead with your presentation and then we'll put it on the floor for discussion.
Thank you.
Great. Good evening, everyone. Tonight we'll be presenting on the Promenade Area Community Improvement Plan. As you might know, the town had initial community improvement plan that was in place from 2014 to 2019, and that was for the Promenade, which is the Yonge and Wellington corridor. And this really focused on downtown revitalization and encouraging private investment through a grant program, through various grant programs, as well as encouraging development on underutilized sites in the downtown. The plan did expire in 2019, and in order to renew it, council directed staff to conduct a review of the program. And as the first steps, we were doing a best practice review of our neighboring municipalities, as well as other communities throughout Ontario offering CIPs, particularly in their downtowns. However, in addition to the original goals of the initial CIP, which was downtown revitalization and more focused on beautification, as well as some elements of heritage, this iteration, we're looking at seeking input for 4 additional buckets. So sustainability, heritage, accessibility, and affordable housing, which align with the themes of the official plan, as well another plan that we're also trying to align with as we're doing this kind of concurrently is the green development standards. So for the purposes of this presentation tonight to this committee, I'll mostly be focusing, highlighting the environmental and sustainability elements of the CIP, as well as best practices. So I'll be reviewing the 7 programs that were in the initial program, as well as providing some initial recommendations that we are making to be added going forward. Just note that these incentives were mostly made for commercial properties, and they're not eligible for single-family residential. Unfortunately, a lot of our neighboring municipalities have very similar programs and do not really offer anything from an environmental or sustainable initiatives or investments. However, one that we did find that it was comparable in scope for the purposes of this study was actually in Middlesex County, which offers a unique sustainability-related incentive program entitled Energy Efficiency and Retrofit Grant. So what this grant would do was encouraging the replacement of windows and lighting with Energy Star models, as well as green roof investments and replacing mechanical systems for more efficient Energy Star models. And so it would be a 50% match grant for the construction costs up to $7,500. We're currently not recommending adding an additional program, but we do see opportunities in the programs that we had in the initial program to include investments in windows, in mechanical systems, as well as lighting. So I'll highlight that as I go through the next 7 programs. So the first program was the facade and signage improvement program. This is very comparable throughout all our neighboring municipalities. And this is where currently the eligible expenses include replacement of doors, windows, facade, and signage. So in the next iteration, we'd look to include actually language that would encourage energy efficiency windows, more to align with some of the goals through the official plan, while also keeping the maximum amount of $15,000. So it'd be a 50% buy-in from the property owner / applicant, as then a match from the town up to $15,000. And this is pretty standard across the board, but we're just more tweaking it to include language that would encourage green development standards or energy efficiency. And this could also be, when we go into the next step of the cost benefit analysis and further analysis of the programs, we could also look at if we prioritize applicants that are addressing energy efficiency over just the replacement of windows.
Oh, looks like Nick is frozen. Ms. House, I don't know if you wanted to chime in.
There we go. I think I can. See if he comes back. I don't know if his is frozen, but I guess we can go. I don't know if we can move to the next one, or was Linda moving the slides, or was Nick?
I'm not sure. Ms. Bodas, were you moving the slides?
No, Nick was sharing his. Oh, here, I think he's back.
Back. Nick, are you back? You were frozen, so we lost you.
I just saw that I lost. Where did you lose me?
Well, you were at the facade page and you were just
At
about
the
to get into that.
recommendations under program 1.
Okay, under program 1. Okay. So here, and just under program 1, we would look at just improving the language that would encourage more sustainable / energy efficiency for facade and signage improvements on buildings in the downtown. The second program is the building renovation and restoration program. Once again, all our neighboring municipalities offer some type similar programming. We actually offer almost one of the higher maximum amounts. And once again, it's 50% of eligible costs. This is where we could take from the Middlesex example and include in the eligible expenses and criteria improvements that are made for mechanical systems that provide energy efficiency. And this is more just to encourage those downtown property owners to try to bring up that standard. And we could also look at prioritizing those applications that focus on that rather than those that are just making other improvements, if that is something we would be looking at. So here, just the suggestions, once again, is related incentives, example, green roofs, updated heating systems, lighting, as well as window replacements. The next two programs are more on a large scale, and this is for mainly for large scale development or new development. From a sustainability standpoint, obviously through our green development standards, there probably would be some alignment with that. However, from an energy efficiency standpoint or criteria, it would have to be quite substantial in order to get any type of relief or a rebate. So there's not too much. We were seeing it more in the other buckets as part of this review. And that goes also for program number 4 is a tax-based increment program. And this is mainly for a new development if it was going from a vacant land to a new building. And this is a grant program that is based on the increase in assessed value, and it's a tax rebate on the municipal portion. So obviously it'd be pretty substantial, and it obviously would include elements of sustainability and energy efficiency initiatives. However, from a direct impact, it might not actually fit within the criteria at this time. Program number 5 is a heritage property tax relief program. This program is only offered in Aurora compared to our neighboring municipalities, and applicants were only able to acquire this program if they had applied for either the facade and signage improvement program or the building restoration program. So in those programs, there might be elements where it's actually contribute both to heritage restoration as well as improving energy efficiency. And finally, there in the initial plan, there was actually an element, environmental perspective. These last two programs were specific to Aurora's case, where in the program identified brownfield sites, large brownfield sites in the downtown that are either underutilized or contaminated. And these were incentives to encourage remediation by the property owner. So for this one, the program is to encourage the redevelopment of otherwise risky sites by providing properties for which a phase 1 ESA existed, with further assistance to specify the extent and nature of environmental contamination through a phase 2 ESA. The grant is geared to private landowners and developers for the renovation and redevelopment or reuse of the property. And this was a matching grant of up to 50% of the cost of the ESA, up to a maximum grant of $20,000, whichever is less. And so this was a rebate-based program. So we would look again, as many of those sites are still remain underutilized or not even utilized right now, and could still have a benefit to the property owners. So we would look at reassessing this incentive moving forward. And finally, program 7 kind of worked in tandem with program 6, is a environmental remediation tax assist program. So it is to encourage the redevelopment of sites which involve the remediation of contaminated soil, buildings, and/or other environmental risk management plans eligible for assistance under regulation. And the environmental remediation tax assist program offers the cancellation of property tax increase that result from the remediation and subsequent redevelopment of contaminated sites. So this program provided for an annual deferral of the municipal portion of the property tax increase that results from the remediation and subsequent redevelopment of a contaminated site. And unfortunately, this program, both program 6 and 7, were never utilized by under the initial plan. However, the sites that were identified still remain either contaminated or haven't progressed anywhere. So it still could be a benefit to those property owners as an incentive to look at either redeveloping and remediating the sites. In terms of next steps, so we're continuing to consult with the advisory committees of the town. We'll be reporting back to council with a public session in June this year, and we'll be assessing and implementing feedback received from these sessions and our public consultation. We'll conduct a further program analysis, we'll conduct a cost benefit analysis, and then we'll be reporting back to council in 2023 for adoption.
Sorry, I was on mute. Thank you very much, Nick. Really appreciate that presentation. Could I get a mover and a seconder to put the item on the floor for discussion? Ryan, second by Ashley. Thank you very much. Are there any questions or comments about the presentation before us today? Ryan?
Just a quick question. I'm just so I understand, this is all proposed, or is this any of this stuff live right now?
So
Nick?
unfortunately, it has expired.
Okay.
So it was available from 2014 to 2019.
Oh,
Any
is it-
follow-up, Ryan?
And is it only for businesses in the Yonge and Wellington region that are historic businesses?
Nick?
It's for, yes, it's within the Aurora Promenade. So predominantly most of Yonge Street and Wellington Corridor, and it was for commercial properties. So it'd be the property owner working in conjunction with a business owner.
Okay.
Ryan?
And what was the take-up rate? So you said it was around for a couple of years. What was the take-up rate like? And also, what was the application rate like, and how long did that take? I'm just curious as to kind of the process and the timeline for someone to take part in that.
Nick?
Sure. The take-up rate for the entire program was very limited. There was about 5 or 6 completed applications, and I believe that was the total amount of applications received as well.
Ryan?
Any idea why it was so low? And if it comes back, what can be done to improve it?
If I could just say, from what I know, and Nick, you can chime in, I think with some of the property owners or small business owners, some of the challenge was they had to have the project kind of upfront and already approved within their own budget per se. So if it was, say, a $50,000 project, it's like they had to have a contractor in place and everything signed and sealed in order to get, say, that $20,000 or $30,000 grant. Whereas people didn't really necessarily utilize it because they didn't have the $50,000 upfront or that planned project upfront to I guess qualify for the grant. Is that can you confirm that? I know there was something there that really was a hindrance for some people to take advantage of.
No, none of the grants were retroactive. That was one condition. So it'd have to be approved and then it could go forward. And yes, it's not an upfront. And if you were approved, the grant wasn't upfront. It would be, depending on what program it was, there would be 10% upfront, and then it would be the rest of the reimbursement would be after completion.
Are there any proposed changes in the future going forward that
Yeah.
would speed it up or make it easier for people to take part in?
Nick?
That'd be the next step of our kind of review of the program, is the actual application process and criteria.
Any follow-up, Ryan?
Oh, that's it. Thank you.
Thanks. I guess I'll speak to you offline, but from what I understand from some property owners, the commitment that they had to make for their project before being, I guess, qualified for the grant was somewhat of a challenge in order to access. And that was some of the feedback I got from some of the property owners and why they didn't participate in the CIP. But perhaps I can talk offline with you about that after. I just don't know if, I don't know, maybe Lisa Howes, maybe you have any information about that in that historic part of the CIP?
Yep, there was two prongs to it. First was, communicating what the CIP is intended to accomplish. It's an incentive program. It's not designed to make or break a business case. So what it was designed to do is incentivize additional things that the town was looking for. And from the 2014 to 2015, it was redevelopment. So if you're planning on redeveloping, here's a few things that might incentivize you to get some add some components to it. Going forward, what we're looking for is to align it with the official plan and in those 4 buckets that Nick mentioned, and really start to incentivize some of those additional pieces. So again, it doesn't make or break your business case and whether you're going to develop or not. It's above and beyond that.
All right, thanks, Lisa. I'll reach out to a couple of my networks that had tried to utilize the CIP and maybe get a little more information how I can get some feedback to make it more accessible and easier for people to want to take advantage of. And report back to you just from what I've heard.
Yes, excellent.
Colin, you had your hand up.
No, I was just thinking, rather than having to pay the money up front, maybe if they could have as long as they have an offer from a contractor, that perhaps they could present it to the town, and if the town approves it, then the town could, commit to ponying up their, a share of it as opposed to reimbursing them after the fact. It's just a thought.
Nick?
Yeah, that's something we'd have to look into, is kind of the process of how we go through the application process.
Colin, any follow-up?
No, that's fine. Thanks very much.
Okay, Councillor Gartner?
Thank you. Thank you, Nick. If I remember correctly, we only were offering money for, brownfields, for, a few facades. And am I missing anything? Was there? I don't know if there was a heritage property tax program.
Nick?
What did we offer? If you could just say.
Those were the 7 programs I went through. So it was.
Oh, we
facade-
offered them all?
All 7 of those programs is what we offered in the initial plan.
And we had uptake on the facade and not, you said not on the brownfield. Do we have
No.
uptake on heritage?
Nick?
Yeah, so I think we had one heritage. So, but it would have had to be in conjunction with the facade and signage improvement program.
Right.
Councillor
And we-
Gartner?
Thank you. We actually got that money from Walmart, I think. When they built out at the 404, some residents were very unhappy about taking away business from the downtown core. And I think they gave us some money that was the core to that. That money has been spent. What wasn't spent, I think, Nick, was transferred to another reserve fund.
Nick?
Maybe this may be before your
Are
time.
you able to answer that, or
If
is it
not, but
relevant?
there's no money left in the fund now. It was transferred out because there wasn't much of an uptake. So where is this money proposed to come from?
Nick?
Can I pass that to Lisa?
Ms. House?
I'll have it over. So there was a fund set aside. It's a limited amount, and it was built into the Aurora Economic Development Corporation type of reserve fund. I'm not sure the exact amount that's in there now, but part of what Nick has mentioned on our cost benefit analysis is how much to implement everything that we'd like to. And if we had 100% uptake on the funds, how many applications and so forth would we be looking at, and can we afford that? Or do we need to increase that fund in order to get some of those incentives out to the community? So that's going to be in our next step, and that's what we'll take feedback from our consultation, and that'll come back to council in 2023, along with the official plan.
Councillor?
I'd just like to suggest that before we go out to the community and we talk about these wonderful programs, maybe we need to decide what council would be willing to put into that fund. It's just a thought. I think it'd be appropriate not to get hopes up, because a lot of people would be interested, I think, if it was communicated properly and if the process was different. But I don't know how much money we would actually have to put into that. It's just a thought, Ms. House.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other questions? No, I just have one. With the bucket on the environmental side of it, you had a couple different takes there. Do you have kind of like a generalized list of boxes that you would tick that you would consider something sustainable or some sort of upgrade in that area? Have you figured out what that bucket looks like if people wanted to, say, put a roof garden or put some permeable solutions in and around their property improvements? Do you have like a bucket already created for that? I don't know who wants to answer that, if it's Ms. House or Nick who wants to take that on.
I can start with that. It's a great question because what the timing for this is ideal because again, following the official plan, the promenade update, and our green development standards, and that's really where we're going to get some of our check boxes, and that language that Nick talked about of how we can add some more meat to that sustainability bucket, and really tying those two programs together.
Perfect, thanks. I think that's something that we all want to see. And if there's an incentive for people who want to make those improvements, I'm definitely in support of it. I'm sure everybody else here is too. So thank you. Any other questions or comments about the CIP program? No? I don't know. Ashley, Sandy, I know you guys have been kind of quiet. Is there anything that maybe you guys are good? All right, perfect. All right. Well, if there's no other comments or questions, I guess no comments. I guess we can call the vote on the receiving the community improvement plan consultation we received at the Environmental Advisory Committee meeting minutes regarding the community improvement plan review consultation we received and refer to staff for consideration and further actions as appropriate. So if there's no further comments, I'll call the vote. All those in favor? Opposed? That carries. Okay, so thank you very much, Nick and Ms. House. Appreciate you guys bringing this forward today, and I look forward to the final review. Thank you. Informational items, the Environmental Advisory Committee update list. Can I have a mover and seconder to put a motion on the floor for discussion? Anybody? Colin and Sam, thank you very much. Any questions or comments on the advisory committee update list on the floor? No, pretty standard. Okay, so if there's no further comments or questions, I'll call the vote. All those in favor to receive? Opposed? That carries. Okay, so I mean, we're at the adjournment. I'm sure everybody's ready for that. May I have a motion to adjourn? Oh, everybody wants to stay?
Okay, I'm going.
Sam, Ashley. All right, all those in favor? Opposed? That carries. Thanks so much, guys. And Ms. Bodas, I don't know if you have the date of the next